Hello everyone. Today we want to continue our sessions on grief. And I want to talk to you about the types of griefs today. Everyone deals with grief differently. Some cry for days, hardly taking a moment to care for themselves. Others laugh, whether nervously or because they manage pain with humor. Others feel numb and wonder why they aren't crying or laughing like others. Each of these reactions is normal. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. I'm here today to simply share with you the information that eventually helped me come to the terms with my loss in my own personal way, in hopes that it would do the same for you. Please share if you or if you know anyone going through or have experienced grief in their life. That being said, grief can become a problem. Grief can trigger dormant mental illness, bring back old traumas, or the grief itself might persist way longer than it should. What is grief? I'm glad you asked. Grief refers to the thought, feelings, and behaviors connected to the loss of something important. It could be the loss of a relationship, a loved one, a job, an object, or anything a person values. The process of grieving. Before describing the normal process of grieving, we should note that normal varies widely between cultures, individuals, and situations. There are 3 types of grief: acute grief, integrated grief, and complicated grief. The first one, acute grief. Symptoms of acute grief: feeling of shock or numbness, intense distress, occurring in waves of 20 to 60 minutes that often include physical and emotional discomfort, shortness of breath and tightness in the throat, sleep difficulties, loss of appetite, restlessness, loss of sex drive, guilt associated with the deceased, poor concentration, intense sadness. Although these symptoms are common, they are very intense. They usually do not warrant a diagnosis by themselves, as they are considered to be a normal part of the grieving process. The symptoms of acute grief will generally begin to resolve themselves naturally. Over the course of several months, the sadness associated with the grief will lose more of its intensity, and other symptoms will become less frequent. We go into the next type, which is integrated grief. As the deep wounds of acute griefs heal, integrated grief begins. During this stage, a person resumes normal activity as the pain of grief slowly subsides. Occasionally, the bereavement will fall back into the acute grief, especially around significant events such as holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. This is normal and does not represent a failure. It's simply a part of the process. And the third one is complicated grief. When a person fails to transition from acute to integrated grief, they may develop complicated grief. During complicated grief, the bereaved experience symptoms of acute grief for years after the loss. Memories of the deceased continue to be frequent, deeply pained, and deliberating. The risk factors of complicated grief are: the loss was unexpected or violent. The bereaved has a history of mood and anxiety disorder. The mental state of the person that's grieving affect the types of grief. The deceased was a child or very young. The bereaved has poor social support. The bereaved experienced poor relationships, neglect, or abuse as a child. The state of mind and the trauma that's tied to the person when grieving will affect the type of grief that they will have. Psychotherapy can help those who experience complicated grief. Typically, the goal of therapy for complicated grief revolves around overcoming obstacles to the normal grieving process and to coming to terms with the loss. So, we've talked about the acute, the integrated, and the complicated grief. Because of the many unique ways that grief is experienced, no model of grief can perfectly describe every person's experience. However, learning about the various models of grief can help you make sense of their own feelings and learn that they are not alone in this experience. So as you continue to either grieve or help someone that's grieving, understanding the process and the types of grieving that they're in will help you to be able to comfort them as you both heal during this time. Stay tuned to our next session as we talk about the stages of grief. I hope you're blessed, and I hope that you're enlightened. See you in the next session.